All right, guys, we are back once again with the best 5 minutes of your day. And I have a very special session for you. I have a very special message that I want to give to you right now, okay? That there really are no bad exercises. There's just exercises that might not be the most appropriate thing for you to do. Number two message is that every exercise really can be an assessment. So if you're doing a shoulder passover, then it looks something like this right here, where to get the stick overhead and behind your back, you're having to move your shoulder off into a funky direction. You need to make a better choice. I want to share with you a little bit of anatomy and then kind of give you an alternative for the stick version of this that works really well. And if that doesn't work, I want to give you some choices that you can make with the stick that are going to help your shoulder move and feel a whole lot better. Now, number one, we talk about the anatomy of your shoulder. Like we just kind of mentioned a few minutes ago, it's kind of a magical area on your body. It should have a ton of mobility. Again, the shoulder itself is your shoulder blade and this ball that sits inside a socket. It has ability to do a lot of things. It's internal and external rotation. It's raising your arm overhead. It's extending your arm back. It's this abduction and adduction. When you take a look at that stick passover, you're like, wow, that kind of covers all of those things. But kind of the rule when we talk about corrective exercise and movement assessment is if something looks funny, then something's not working the right way. Now, typically with this exercise, when you see that kind of funky motion going on there, this is not a shoulder problem so much, but this is more of a problem with your shoulder blade not getting out of the way, meaning muscles aren't firing appropriately. And if you keep doing that movement that looks funny, not good things are going to happen. So, number one, if you have to do a banded passover, if the peer pressure is just too much in your class, what you should be doing is using a band instead, a light band, because what this is going to do when we do this movement overhead, back and forth like this, is it's going to help activate some of the muscles between your shoulder blades that are not doing what they're supposed to do when we're trying to get overhead. So the exercise, again, looks exactly the same. Let me just drop it back down one more time and kind of show you what it looks like. Again, showing you all the different ranges of motion here. So we've got this flexion, we've got extension, internal and external rotation. You're allowed to, as you go overhead, adjust the tension to kind of accommodate the positioning of your shoulder. So that's actually a really good thing. Again, it's kind of charging up some of the smaller stabilizing muscles between your shoulders and in your rotator cuff, so that's a good thing. I don't know that it's necessarily the best place to go, but if you must do banded passovers, ditch the stick and go with the band. Now, preferably what we could do is start to work on the range of motion just a little bit more. You can kind of cut it down. Again, if you want to avoid problems and still do the passovers with the band, you can kind of work on primarily two things. So number one, you can work on just the shoulder flexion and just kind of work through ranges of motion that as you lift the band, like feel okay. You'll probably take the band and as you go overhead, work on just splitting it just a little bit so there's more tension. And this should help you activate kind of those mid to lower traps, which gets dysfunctional when we press overhead. So this is actually a good exercise to do. The second thing that you could do with this is just work on resetting your shoulder blades. Again, oftentimes that dysfunction you saw in the dislocation or the banded passover exercise was due to faulty positioning of your shoulder blades. One real simple way that you could get the shoulder blades reset is to just work on the extension phase of the passover. So pretty much all that's going to look like is something like this, where you just work on extension, and as you do it, you kind of choke up on it and just pull hard here. And this one is actually a really good exercise because you could feel those muscles charge up. So those are a couple of kind of mobility, stability, activation drills that are probably preferable to a stick that's not really providing you any type of resistance and keeping your arm in a fixed position. So those are good options. Okay. Now, what you could do if you want to use the stick as an assessment is kind of understand that if this shoulder doesn't look like when it's moving, it probably is dysfunctional. It probably needs some work. So you could do a few things with the stick that are going to help give you some mobility. You could start off with just working on external rotation. So one way that we could do this is kind of priming the stick against your arm right here, and then taking your arm off to a little bit of an angle, and then using the bottom hand as a crank to do something that looks like that right there. And that's going to help this portion of the motion, or that kind of like first action here of getting your arm over your head. Second thing is working on flexion. So we could take our hand at the bottom or at the top of the stick here and kind of cup it, use the bottom hand as a driver, and work on extending your arm back. So that obviously looks like this right here. As we go overhead into this position, this is called internal rotation and extension. We'll first work on internal rotation. So that would be grabbing the stick right here and getting your arm to pull up like this. And then last thing with this is just working on internal rotation, or extension, excuse me, and that's just pulling your arms back, something like this. So there's a few options. There's some alternatives right there. You could break that one Passover overhead with the stick, which is potentially dangerous because that ball just isn't rolling around the socket because the socket is moving around a whole lot. And you could break that into 4 mobility drills with the stick as an alternative if that's all you have in your class and you don't want problems. Or you could grab a band and try the banded versions, which are going to apply some activation work in there too. So there's a couple options for you. My suggestion though, one more time, is if it doesn't look good when you go overhead and you're having to do something like that right there, just ditch it and move on to something else. Anyways, thanks for checking in. If you want to avoid a lot of shoulder problems, just use the link that's in the post up there. I put a link for the Ultimate Shoulder, and I'm going to leave it on sale for a little while longer if you want some help with that. Or you just want me to make you a plan, reach out. All right, thanks for checking in, guys.